Hey everyone, in this video I will talk about the old era ships of Hello Neighbor and Smentin. If you like other modern ships, then good for you. In case you are new to this term, shipping is the pairing of two characters, either in a platonic, romantic way, like you see these two characters and you prefer them being a pair over somebody else or over being single. It's part of every fandom's culture, every single. If you don't like ships, then it's okay, but please don't harass or make up lies about people who like shipping. Or please don't harm them for things they haven't even done. Also, just because somebody ships two characters, it doesn't mean that they can't make another fan fiction or fan art where the characters have different roles. These are things that happened to this fandom, so that's why I'm mentioning them already. And you know what? If people want to ship characters, which is legal, then I absolutely don't mind it. It can bring a totally new perspective, both for the story and both for some characters. It can get people to like a character or like some media which the characters are from. This all also happened in this fandom. And if somebody still doesn't want to see it, well, the block button exists. So with this in mind, let's see our first ship. Neighbor X player is as old as pre-alpha or alpha 1. I'm underlining this. This ship is as old as the game itself. The ship is about the neighbor and the player's character. Before getting further, there's something to clear up. Player and the neighbor as well must be split up to 3 characters. Maybe there were more characters, but I only know about 3, so I will talk about these 3 characters. The player from pre-alpha and alpha 1, the player who was the neighbor's son, and the player who nowadays runs by the name Nicky. I am going to ignore every media in which there is no adult Nicky or adult player character. When it comes to shipping, we obviously close out the neighbor's son option. Nicky from the Hello Neighbors final release storyline is also... Nowadays I can't really see it happening. Now that I know the storylines, they don't really meet as adults. I'm saying it as someone who experimented with this thought not once, especially when I was new into the fandom. So we are left with the early alphas player, and this is who I'm going to talk about in the next part of the video. As for body and name, I think you guys see why people prefer drawing the Alpha 2 player once he was revealed, regardless of the storylines and the canon. This model is the player model. This model wasn't changed later at all. Now for the neighbor, something similar happened. We have the early Alpha's bachelor neighbor, player's dad, and Theodore Peterson from the Hello Neighbor final release version. We already crossed out the player's dead for similar reasons, and Theodore is most likely dead by the time he could meet Nicky when the guy is returning to Ravenbrooks at age 32. So we are left with the early alpha's neighbor, and this is what we will focus on. It's also worth mentioning that AUs, aka alternative universes, where the people are creating their own canon or modify the existing canon storylines, are heavily present when somebody is creating fan art or fanfiction. And the ships in my video are crack ships. It means that they have little to nothing to do with any of the canons. They are made for fun. If you are in fandoms, you probably know this. I'm just saying in case you aren't or you are new to this term. So with this in mind, what is Neighbor X Player? Neighbor X Player was the first and for long the only ship that the Hello Neighbor community had. As I said, it is as old as the game, simply because during that time, there were just 2 characters in Hello Neighbor, the neighbor and the player, the strong dude chasing down the teen dude. The ship became widely known and loved, partly because people didn't really know what's happening in the canon. There wasn't much story to pre-alpha and alpha 1, or they just wanted to have fun. They were given a fantastic plot and good characters. They could build their own canon from that point. It was up to their interpretation, and they went wild with it. I know this from first hand because despite I know everything you can possibly know as a fan about Hello Neighbor and the storylines nowadays. For more than a half year, around 2018, I didn't have the slightest idea about what Hello Neighbor really is or what the storylines were about, and that there were multiple storylines. Player's personality was not set in stone. He appears differently in fanfictions and in other media like fan arts, because Hello Neighbor back then was up to the person who played the game. Now I know what's up with the storyline, but back then it wasn't common knowledge. People to this day still don't exactly know what was the deal with the Faust storyline. People didn't even know that there were different storylines at all. That this and this and this are three completely different storylines. I separate the storylines entirely, and I used to write stories based on each storyline. They are different with different characters who look the same, but they are different souls in the same body. That's why it's good to make fan content about Hello Neighbor. There's a lot of things from old plots and old stories to work with, but you need to know what you are doing. But back to sailing. To understand things more, I need to talk about this ship as a phenomenon. The most famous plot in fan creations was that neighbor and player are neighbors, which is the base plot of the game. Player was usually stubborn and very curious, being in his early 30s or something around that. For some reason, which was always different, he is addicted to breaking into his neighbor's house and opening the basement. And then there's the neighbor, the chill gentleman, smooth criminal perhaps, the bit older one, the kind of guy who has a 69 shirt and a doll drying on his balcony, and he just loves hunting his prey down and punishing him, while both men toss curses at each other. This is basically the gameplay itself, minus the cursing part, which is sadly only in the files. So, player moves to the place. They both spy on each other. Player breaks in, they chase, neighbor catches him, they do the
Devil's Tango.
and there's an ending. That's it. That's the ship. It's so damn simple, and that's why it works. Someone even made a dating sim, and it's the silliest thing ever. It's fun, and you are supposed to have fun in the fandoms after all. Be creative and do whatever you like. There's also the fact that Neighbor is a strong dude who is in control in the game, and he's probably very experienced, and Player is this thin and curious dude who is very stubborn and wants to open the basement door, but he's probably very inexperienced, so they are kind of opposites. This pairing is pretty much just what I said. If you're curious, I got a lot of older posts backupped on my Tumblr. They give me a lot of nostalgia, and I wanted to save them for later. As soon as the player got a detailed body in Alpha 2, people started doing that. I don't blame them. He has a good design. Sorry, pre-alpha player who is technically invisible. And when players got an official name, then people just began calling him Nicky. They still didn't exactly know what's up with the storylines. Before they got names, many fans just named them
It's Mr. Wilson's wife? Or dare I say husband? Oh!
or Harry and James, which was the most common. You know, fandom do fandom things. Crazy, I know. Heck, when I first googled Hello Neighbor, one of the first ever things that came up was this fan art, which was one of the reasons why I checked out the game later. Only after the Beta 3 build release did people begin to put things together and assume what the storylines were about, and the fact that there were multiple storylines and the story changed not once. This information is very important, and it's very often ignored nowadays in the present by newcomers. Back then, multiple fandoms were trying to look for the light in the darkness. The other shocking thing was that people were supportive. Even if they came up with a completely different player interpretation and modified the widely accepted neighbor personality or switched the roles even, others cheered. People had different ideas, but everybody got along. Some started shipping the portrait guy and the neighbor, which is, yes, some thought that the portrait guy is the player until the player was shown in Alpha 2. And just because things change in canon, it doesn't mean that everybody just throws away their own stories and their own canon interpretations. I mean, why would they? Neighbor X Player was quite popular ship on Tumblr, and not just by Hello Neighbor fans, because it had everything a 2017 era indie horror game fandom ship could have. Two characters whose personalities the fans could expand as they pleased. A good pace plot. The setup itself was simple enough. A stubborn guy breaking into a house, and the handsome owner is hunting him down. And they were in love. But later, with the arrival of the final storyline and other franchise expansions and everything else, this all has changed. And while the old fans of the ship probably never hurt a fly by creating content that people can still crop us, the haters did way too much damage already. I am not willing to talk about the dramas and the haters who do everything to destroy people just because they can find a block button. All I'm saying is do not ruin people because of fictional ideas. Based on the threats that I have been getting for over 3 years nonstop, people are either told lies or misinformation, and they refuse to believe what is literally in front of them with evidence. I saw my friends abandoning this entire franchise, and others simply just don't post content only because some people can't find the block button. The ship is just what I described, and if somebody says otherwise, then they most likely are misinformed or they want to cause harm on purpose. This pair was always about two grown men chasing in a house. And this is it. There's nothing to overcomplicate. It's this simple. If I look at these fanarts, I see a different neighbor and player. Don't expect fans to change their mind as the canon changes, especially if it changes this often. People just maybe have their stories already. They worked hard on these stories, just as the creators work on their own canon. If you read a few fanfictions from 2017, things may be a bit more clear. All I ever contributed to this ship was naming them glued neighbors recently, because anything with a bear trap included was too wild. The ship didn't even have a name, it was just Neighbor X Player. So if you plan to make those two variations of neighbor and player work, then go ahead, be creative. I mean, we have the error word and everything, and I believe in open discussions. So new ideas are welcome if they are not harmful. I believe in overcoming fears together. If you want to write a bonding fanfiction with Theodore magically being alive in Act 3, and he is getting along with Nicky, then I will probably read it. We need more positive content where the characters help each other to achieve peace. Nowadays, I'm personally staying at the very alphas if we discuss shipping. The core of Neighbor X Player is from the time. Most of my stories take place there, some earlier stories not, but it was always explained what I changed in the plot and what I changed in the canon because I did. These stories are made for fun, and I was practicing writing with them, and I had a lot of fun, and people liked it. Here's some fanfiction plots from other people. Neighbor and player defeating the thing together, who is a demon creature in the neighbor's basement. Something is very suspicious about this story. Neighbor baking cookies for the player, but he takes revenge on the poisoned milk by putting sleeping powder to the cookies. Neighbor having a family, but all of them are dead, and he is finding peace by the side of the player after getting to know him better. Also, there's the classic angel and demon AU. These fictional characters sometimes help much more to people than people in real life, simply because the game carries a deep message that people in the present world just refuse to keep, which is don't judge by rumors, don't judge by first sight. Everybody has different life story and everybody struggles in their own way. There's no just black and white stories, there's a lot more under the surface. I must say three things. Ships aren't just sexual. Actually, what really matters is to be soulmates with your pair, and many fanfictions show this. If you think a ship is only sexual, then you are really lost. I believe that if Neighbor was alive by the time Nikki returns at age 32 to the town, they could just finally do what 7 books couldn't do and sit the fuck down and discuss everything. Nikki is mature enough and he has a huge heart and Theodore is a man in despair. I did write this exact plot in the form of a fanfiction. It took me 100 pages to get things right, and if I wrote it today, it would be even more. If the new canon can torture people for no reason, then don't mind me if I will write about the very same characters finding love and peace because they absolutely deserve it. This ship is from early 2020. Hello Guest prototype just came out. You just read the fourth book. Secret Neighbor updates, and you figure out the ice puzzle, and you notice a man in the hat in a bush. This ship is about the player of Hello Guest and Hello Guest prototype who ran by the names Ike and then Quentin, and Man in the Hat, aka Smith. Smith's name was approved, so I'm going to call him Smith in this video. This ship is a bit different from the previous one, simply because there are only a few fans of it, and the fact that Hello Guest, the game in which these two characters were in, got scrapped, and in strict terms, none of them made it to Hello Neighbor 2. But there's a few things in common. The characters are not as detailed, there's only a base plot, and we don't know where the plot ended up. Smentin is the collective name of any kind of positive relationship between the man in the hat, Smith, and Quentin from Hello Guest. They can be allies, friends, they don't have to be a pair or to be in love, but since this is a shipping video, I will mention only the shipping part here. So why am I saying all of this so confidently? Simply because I was the one who invented this ship. As you see, Quentin as well pulled a Nicky and went through many changes from being a night guard to being a journalist who is high as I mean, he's up there. Smentin focuses on Hello Guest Quentin mainly, but can expand to the journalists too, but there's a little complication, so I'm going to focus on Hello Guest Quentin. They first appeared on a film reel in Secret Neighbor event together. This was on February 19th, 2020. And first I didn't even think of these two as a pair, but then people started joking about the Secret Neighbor reel, which is currently playing in the video, and saw them as a pair, and then I started thinking, what if these two characters weren't enemies? Could these two have a dynamic? And the answer is yes. Oh my god, I think the creators by accident created the most dynamic duo in the entire franchise. Plot of the fanfictions is usually based around Hello Guest and Hello Guest prototypes, plot and gameplay. Again, small canon plot, which you can expand. In the stories, Smith watches Quentin just like in the game. Something starts in him after their first encounter, and when he experiences the phenomenon that is called Quentin. Quentin is nice, friendly, silly, ill-fated, scared, and hilariously loyal. He doesn't hurt people. Smith is very selfish. He isn't a nice person. He goes after his goals and wants to complete them no matter what it takes or who he has to go through. And this is important. He wants to show his power. He wants to dominate the other characters, use them, and then leave them behind. Quentin is his opposite. And while he is very lonely and he likes to be with someone and easily bonds with people, Smith just doesn't want that at all. When the Hetman sees that the other handles that one interaction as if they were already married or something like that, he starts to care about some other person than himself. Smith also experiences good treatment. So Quentin doesn't hurt him. He's actually taking care of Smith. He wants to spend time with him, and Smith has enough remaining soul, and he is still a gentleman inside to not treat him badly after this. He kind of ends up protecting Quentin sometimes. Smith has bad memories with people, obviously, also in canon, but this guy treats him so nicely, and in the canon, Quentin is actually the only character who doesn't harm Smith. While Neighbor X Player was burning passion when it came to shipping, Smentin is much more chill and much more of an emotional journey of a cold, introverted man ending up caring about a silly, extroverted guard who somehow didn't die yet. Also, they're like 40 in Helogest, something around that. I will link a very long explanation post in the description because I happen to have one since 2020 for those who are truly interested in this ship. But here's a few stuff that make this dynamic work perfectly because they happen to be total opposites. Colors are one of the main things that can connect two characters. Smith has a very pale and cold color palette, while Quentin is probably the most colorful character in the entire franchise. Smith has a quite selfish and rude personality. He is a gentleman on the surface, but clearly he will do anything to get to his goal. He desperately wants to dominate. On the other hand, Quentin is most likely a very pacifist dude who doesn't even bother fighting back, even though I'm convinced that he is the stronger one. Anybody is stronger than Smith, really. I will make a separate video about the character designs in Hello Neighbor because it's absolutely worth it. Let it be enough that Smith and his car are very sharp and he's a triangle himself, while Quentin has round shapes and he's a circle with two stick legs. Smith, as said, wants to desperately be in control in any situation, and Quentin just doesn't care. He is silly, curious, and scared, a companion, a buddy. Also, there's a lot of fan ideas where people just modify the characters as they wish. Fact is fact, Smith does watch us during the game nonstop. Even from the beginning, even after our shift is over, and even when we are in the hospital. And we know that Beatrix doesn't show the slightest interest in him, actually looks down at him. So we are left with the only character who has never heard Smith and who could change him for the better. Smith isn't a good person in canon either. I will say again, you didn't see my early stories when I was even closer to canon and the books even. Smentin for me was a journey and it helped me to get to like the characters because partly because of the books and partly seeing what Smith is doing in the real. I just dislike both of them. Usually Quentin is optimistic and up in the clouds mindset ends up changing Smith's realistic and pessimistic personality, but this also works a bit backwards. Quentin is very kind and a bit silly of a guy who likes to talk and have fun, while Smith literally never talks and he likes to be alone in dark rooms and on hilltops. Smith, by finding someone else to care about and not just admiring himself, becomes a more detailed and more interesting character. Fanfiction examples. My first fanfiction, which I wrote with a friend, was about Smith being a cultist because the cultists happened around book 4. But then Smith has a change of heart when he is ordered to kill Ike, and Smith actually ends up protecting him. Smith being Quentin's boss and ends up changing from a selfish to being the guy who cares about Quentin and spends time with him. Quentin and Smith looking for little creatures in the woods together. Quentin and Smith having a picnic. Smith getting to know Quentin better and realizing that people are not the same and there's always an exception. And the list goes on. As closing thoughts, I'm saying one thing. If the canon can have a million storylines, then so can the fans. Hello Neighbor is exactly the media where it should be fine. This is not an excuse, this is a statement. You are supposed to have fun in fandoms after all. If you understand these ships better, or if you like them better now, then it's fantastic. If you still don't, then it's also fine, but please just mute and block people who happen to ship these ships and do not harass them. Seriously, it's fiction. If you got this far, then here's a cookie. Thank you very much for watching.